Great. Thank you, Riley, and thank you everyone for joining today. So we're planning to talk today about a new initiative that has been put forward by the FCC to provide internet connectivity funding for schools and the ability to reach out to those that do not have access. This is known as the Homework Gap, the fact that close to 20% of students within the United States do not have access to the internet. And as you're aware, there are different funding mechanisms that have come into play over the last year or year and a half post-COVID related to that. So we're going to talk through some of these topics today, a bit about the funding. We have on the line Jim Hinsdale from Livewire Networks, as Riley introduced, and he's a service provider in the Rockies area in Colorado that has deployed networks and provided access to these kinds of scenarios that we're going to talk about today. So I'm going to kick off a little bit talking about the fund. We'll talk about some of the solutions, and then we will discuss some of the implementation details. If you have any questions along the way, please pop them into the Q&A box there, and we'll address them as we go through this. So the Emergency Connectivity Fund was put into play earlier this year, actually just a couple months ago by the FCC. And if you're not aware of it, it is part of the broader American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. So there has been multiple multi-trillion-dollar funding stimulus packages that have been put into play, as you're probably aware, over the last couple administrations. And these are targeted specifically at, COVID relief and recovery from the pandemic over the last 18 months or so. And this specific funding was part of that last act, about $7 billion that was appropriated for Congress, and specifically geared towards the ability to provide or the need to provide internet access to off-campus students. So when they're not in the school, when they're not in the library, that they can access the internet at home or other locations. And as I mentioned, this is a approximately 20% problem that we have here in the U.S. In terms of reaching these students. Now, many schools have recovered and moved back to in-person classes. Hybrid still exists in many cases. I think, though, looking forward, there's obviously the need and the perception of needing to plan ahead if these things recur or happen again. We need to provide access so remote learning, remote work for others as well are supported, and we can get internet out to these locations. So this program was put in place specifically for that. If you are familiar with E-rate, if your school has previously used E-rate funding, the same administrative arm of the FCC, the USAC, has the management purview for this fund. So they are going to be administering this fund, and it is actually in operation today. The filing window is actually open right now, so they are taking applications for that. From an eligibility perspective, important to understand what the fund pays for. It is geared towards, again, access for students at home. So paying for a laptop or tablet computer up to $400 is covered. The hotspot, the ability to connect to Wi-Fi locally where you're at, as well as the modem and router then to connect to the internet. These are all part of the funding of the ECF, and then as well as an amount that would apply towards the ongoing service, the monthly charge that comes from the ISP. Now, in some cases, there are people that do not have available broadband networks, whether those are fiber or cable or DSL or otherwise. And in this case, this is where this construction of new networks may be applicable. That is not as clear-cut as some of the others, but certainly this is the type of service that Cambium provides from a wireless broadband perspective that can apply to that kind of scenario. And so, reasonable costs, these are things that are, evaluated, upon the application being made. So the application process, as I mentioned, is actually underway right now. It opened up on June 29, so a few weeks ago, and lasts until the middle of August, so about another month. So there is an online portal. So if your school has a need to, to apply and to provide internet access for some of your students that do not have it today, this fund is available. It is actually available to apply for now at that location that you can see there, the website. It is an emergency fund, so the FCC has authorized USAC to move quickly and process, as you can see, 50% of the applications within 60 days. So we're seeing unprecedented turnaround in some of these kinds of things. The E-rate year for 2021 as well, the funding happened a lot quicker than normal was our observation. So it's clear that the emergency element of this is kind of front and center as the FCC is trying to move these programs into place quickly and get the funding out so that schools are ready for the upcoming school year. And just to make note, there are different funds. There's different funds that have been put forward, and I'm not going to cover all of them today. We kind of focused on the ECF because that was immediately available, but there's also an emergency broadband program that was put out earlier. Actually, enrollment only started about a month earlier, but this provides up to $50 a month to consumers for internet access and $75 per month upon tribal lands. And this was a $3.2 billion fund. So these funds can actually work together and complement each other, one providing more of the equipment and one providing more, a greater amount for the monthly charge. And there's rules to prevent duplicate funding there. In addition to these two funds, ECF and EBB, there's also CARES Act, which has certainly provided funding for many initiatives that we've seen over the last year. That funding has a lot of it's been used up, so some of these other programs can come into play. But we certainly want to make you aware of the fact that these are there, and these are some things that are immediately available to you as a school or a public library within the U.S. Okay, I'm going to pass it over at this point to Sakid, who's going to talk a little bit about some of the solutions then that can be applied, wireless solutions that can be applied to these initiatives. Sakid?
Right. Hey, thanks, Bruce. So first and foremost, welcome everyone to this session. Excited to have everyone on the call. But before I start, Bruce, I wanted to highlight a question that came in. And I know we could wait till the end, but I thought maybe it'd be a good time to respond to that question if you happen to know the answer.
Sure. Okay, so let's see. We have a one-in-one program in place today. About 100 of our Chromebacks are 3.5 years old. Would we be able to replace these Chromebacks with the ECF fund, assuming that we had 100 students with unmet need? I believe the answer to that is yes. I mean, what we've seen so far is that the majority of the applications that we understand have been going into Chromebook, laptop type replacements. So from what we've seen, that should be the case. But obviously you have to, provide the appropriate qualification of that. So.
Thanks, Bruce.
All right.
All right. Just confirm that you are able to see my screen. Okay. So what we wanted to do is, since we talked about the ECF funds, and I'm glad, Bruce, we highlighted some of the other funds available. And really the most exciting part of this webinar is going to be when we bring Jim Hinsdale onto the call, because that's truly a real world example of how Cambium networks, along with our current customer base, can help the school districts leverage some of these funds available to them, to the government, in enabling broadband access to your student body. So without getting too technical, I'm going to try to portray how we, as in Cambium networks and our customer community, can help you leverage a different technology that we offer to bring that connectivity. This is obviously a bit of a map showing the different type of applications, but ultimately, the thing that I want to highlight is that your students and every device that you talk about needs that Wi-Fi connectivity, right? So whether it's Wi-Fi inside the house, or it's whether Wi-Fi in public places such as communities and gathering places, church parking lots, whatnot, you want to be able to extend that network to that space. And how you connect that Wi-Fi is where we come in. Obviously, we have the Wi-Fi part of it, but that broadband connectivity, that's really key. So with that, I'll talk a little bit and explain a little bit on this front, is that if you think about your school campus today, you have a relatively fat broadband pipe coming into your school, right? You're probably paying for fiber and gigabits of data. And the issue is, well, how do I potentially leverage some of these funds to get to the student body out there and give them the internet that they need, whether it's better speeds or just basic connectivity. So one of the concepts here is that you could essentially extend your network using different types of technology. Many of you probably heard about the idea of private LTE, which is in this 3.5 CBRS band. There's offerings that we make in terms of unlicensed technology in 5 gigahertz, which is what Wi-Fi uses, but it's a proprietary solution. And then things like millimeter wave technology. So we have numerous solutions that, let me get my laser on, because then it's a little easier to point to things. We have numerous solutions that allow you to rebroadcast what you have towards the residential community and potentially put a device on a rooftop and then provide a Wi-Fi router inside the house to bring that connectivity. Or you can beam from outside of the house if you don't want to get into the rooftop type situations. And this is where we'll talk a little bit and get Jim's perspective on it, because when we talk about this type of solution, there has been reactions from school districts saying, whoa, 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 I don't want to be held accountable for putting this right here on top of the roof. Well, that's where the service providers come in. The second thing in this scenario that I do want to talk about is when the pandemic hit and broadband connectivity became a big issue, one of the first reactions or the avenues that many chose were going with MyFi type devices, which inevitably led to thousands of devices, managing them, talking to the AT&T Verizons of the world and paying that recurring fee, and worrying about that in future years from a budget perspective. So what we talk about here as a Cambium Networks offering is going to be the counter or the other side of MyFi. How do you avoid relying heavily on MyFi? Having said that, the one point I wanted to make early on is if you look at the ECF fund specifically, because it's an emergency connectivity fund, it seems to be written a bias towards, hey, if you have existing coverage, that's where you should be able to leverage, and which naturally moves towards, well, if AT&T has a tower, doesn't matter what that bandwidth that tower will provide you, you need to use that, i.e. go buy yet another MyFi card or buy another SIM card. And that's where there's a pretty nice line that says it doesn't necessarily have to be an AT&T or a Comcast or a Verizon. Cambium Networks has thousands of service providers, wireless internet service providers throughout the United States. Jim happens to be one of those, and they have coverage potentially in many of your neighborhoods where you want the coverage. So you could potentially say, yes, there is an existing provider. They don't happen to be AT&T or Verizon, but now by partnering up with one of those service providers, you can still qualify for things like ECF funds. And when Jim talks about this, that will be the most relevant, but I want to make sure I highlight that. But long story short, what I wanted to show here is the idea of a point-to-multipoint network where you're offering coverage inside the house and potentially putting a device on the roof. The second solution is the concept of extending Wi-Fi to hotspots in public places. So this is playgrounds, your stadiums and things like that. Bottom left-hand, you see a small device on the top that is picking up the signal, let's assume from your school tower, and then feeding it through an Ethernet port to the Wi-Fi hotspot, which is giving coverage throughout this area. Once again, how you connect that Wi-Fi backhaul is where we come in, because we have that capability. Once again, CBRS, high performance millimeter wave, or proprietary solutions. All of these methods can do that. And then last but not least, while we talk about millimeter MyFi and whatnot, there is one other option. If you want to provide that Wi-Fi coverage to residences, playgrounds again, you could go back and use Cambium Wi-Fi, but use a hotspot of sorts with a SIM card that fires up and talks to the cellular tower and gives you that instantaneous Wi-Fi coverage. This is not low power MyFi type device. And I just realized that the picture that I wanted to show in that slide is right here. Something like this that will talk to a cellular network with high power, good coverage, good signal strength, and then through Ethernet, provide the internet to that outdoor Wi-Fi hotspot, giving you that coverage throughout the areas. So there's a set of solutions essentially. And our job as a vendor of equipment is less about giving you a bunch of solutions, say pick one, but rather giving you the confidence that there is a solution for everything, but bringing in service providers like Livewire to make things simple and easy for you. So you're really worried about education, you're worried about the students having connectivity, their Chromebooks connecting, and less worrying about the network. In all cases, in these situations, we are presenting this outdoor network as a virtual extension of your indoor network. So if you happen to have Wi-Fi inside your school, which you inevitably do, and you have a management system, once you build that outdoor network, you're still managing it from the same exact pane of glass. And that is one of the strengths of Cambium, that end-to-end management system. With that, I wanted to show a picture here, which is about the MyFi challenge. We have heard from school administrators and IT folks that, you know, thousands of MyFi devices, managing that has become challenged. And the thing that to remember is that MyFi devices is not a sustainable solution. In the long term, this is not just about that 6-month problem we're solving. We're solving a problem that is years, right? Unfortunately, the cellular networks, the cable networks, cable operators, they really want to focus on the high-paying customers in dense environments. So we could be waiting months and years to get the DSL network updated so that your students can have not just a 2 megabit per second link, but a 10 megabit per second link. And when you talk about MyFi, you're really sharing the same spectrum that a person with an iPhone is using, and so is your student. So our message is it's about a purpose-built network. And what I wanted to show here real quick is if I go to the Cambium Networks website, if I go to solutions page, I click on, homework app, which is what we created, a purpose-built page for you. You can go and click on estimating the MyFi versus fixed wireless cost. And you, the IT head of IT at a school district, you can say, hey, my MyFi device cost is $149. Monthly charge, let's make it $40. I'm gonna type, okay. I think I put a negative number accidentally. $40. How many devices you want to do? Like 1,000 devices. Over here, from a fixed wireless perspective, we plugged in some numbers here, but you can play with these numbers as well. And because here I dropped the numbers quite a bit, your one-time monthly maintenance cost, because you're extending the school network, you can say, hey, it's going to be as little as $20 a month. And Jim can highlight that even more and say, hey, maybe this is cheaper than that. But the idea behind this is with a cost ROI calculator, you can get a sense of what it would cost you to continue carrying MyFi over time, over multiple years, and continuously paying that versus building out a fixed wireless network with Wi-Fi at the end. That really is the purpose of this tool. And it's not meant to be exact science in the sense we didn't calculate down to the pennies, but give you a high level idea just to see what it looks like in terms of ROI for MyFi versus fixed wireless. So that is the gist of that one, and that's kind of what we wanted to show. But with that, me talking and Bruce talking is probably not as exciting. But I wanna hand over the microphone to Jim. Jim is the president of Livewire, which is based out of Colorado. But I'm not gonna do too much on the introduction. Jim, our ask is that we have probably a very mixed group of audience from school districts and potentially some fellow customers of yours. But if you could talk a little bit about what you did with the Boulder Valley School District and the exciting project that you undertook and your vision for the community, et cetera, we'd love to hear that. So over to you, Jim.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Akid. I appreciate being here and having us on to talk about the project. It's a really exciting project. We started it back in 2016 with Boulder Valley Schools. We started our wireless network in the mid 2000s, I think 2005, up in Boulder, and we were at this was 2015, 2016. We started an initiative here at Livewire to get more dense coverage because we wanted to start preparing for 5G and to be able to compete effectively with the upcoming 5G world that we're all going into. And so we knew we needed more, distribution sites. Boulder's a tough market to get into. There are some restrictions in terms of putting up wireless systems. And so, we had the concept of trying to work with some of the public institutions, schools, housing authorities, city, various folks. And we happened to come across the Andrew Moore with the Boulder Schools IT department, who had this ConnectMe initiative that they were trying to get off the ground at the same time. And so we just, the timing was perfect. We were looking for places to set up distribution sites. They were looking for a service provider to partner with to provide service for these families in these various areas, and it just worked. We started a pilot project. We did, I think, 4 or 5 schools initially, some in Lafayette and some in Boulder itself, and started providing service for the families with some of the gear we had on hand at that time, and started hooking folks up, and it worked. And so one thing led to the other. We finally got it approved through the Board of Education with the school district to expand it. And just as that, came into play, the pandemic hit, and so the whole thing blew up on us. But it's a pretty neat program. We're happy to be a part of it, and it's something that I think it's a really good example of a very effective public-private partnership. And I think in this environment, especially now with the economy, a lot of folks really are still struggling from the pandemic and trying to get traction. I think it's a real good model going forward for smaller ISPs like Livewire to set up public-private partnerships with school districts and housing authorities and cities and counties to be able to do this. So it seems to be working well. I can talk a little bit about the infrastructure. So we are using the Cambium 450M Medusa 3.5 gig that operate in the CBRS band. And we wanted to do that. We've been looking at that for a while. These neighborhoods up in Boulder, some of them have a pretty significant amount of trees, and so we knew we had some canopy to punch through. So we needed, the effective power levels of the CBRS system, and so we got hooked up with that early on. Got into CBRS. We're working with the general access frequencies, so the GAA frequencies, if you're familiar with that CBRS scheme. And it's working well. We're getting out, 1 to 3 miles typically from these sites. The slide that's up shows a typical install. This doesn't have one of the Cambiums on it. This is one of the earlier systems. But what I'm showing here is what we call just a 5-foot frame and what we call a control frame. And so we wanted to have a cookie cutter system that was virtually the same from school to school. So essentially what we do is we set up 2 5-foot frames, and then we run conduit back to a control frame. This control frame sits right next to one of the frames, so you can see that. And then we've got 2 conduits coming into the control frame. One is for power and one is for fiber. And so in one of the J boxes on the control frame, we've got a fiber switch, and in the other box, we've got room for backup batteries. And so all the system is on the roof, fully self-contained. We use a lift truck to do all our installations and maintenance. So if we have to go up after hours to fix something, we have access to be able to do that, to go up on the roof and get things done. So we don't have to, wait for security to let us into the school and all that. Let's see. I can talk a little about the service and on the financial side. As you mentioned, they did get a grant with the school district, ECF, Emergency Connectivity Fund grant, just a little over $1 million to provide hardware for the system. And so, I told them, let's go out and buy some access points. So they went and did that. So we've got a bunch of access points to put in up there. On the other side, you mentioned the EBB, Emergency Broadband Funding, and so we're also leveraging that and just started getting payments from that program to offset doing the connectivity to the families. So the service to the families is free. There's no charge for the install or the monthly service. And then we get compensated currently through the EBB program. We're also here a couple of years ago, we started the process of becoming a Lifeline provider, which played right into getting into the EBB program. So it kind of streamlined that process for us a little bit. But a service provider does not have to be a Lifeline provider now with the way EBB is set up. You can go directly to the FCC, and you just have to send a letter to them, and you can request to participate in the EBB program. So don't think that you have to go through the Lifeline program to get into EBB, because you do not now. So that program, the EBB program, will pay up to $50 for a service connection to a low-income family. And they've got it set up to where this program runs through the free or reduced lunch program with the school. So the EBB program automatically recognizes school lunch program participants. And so it's much easier than Lifeline to get a subscriber set up to work on EBB, because they just have to have a student that's in the free or reduced lunch program to be authorized for it. So they've greased the skids a little bit there, if you will, to make that easier for service providers to get people onto the system and to be paid for the service. So between the ECF providing the hardware for the network and the EBB providing, the payments for the families themselves for the monthly service, it's a no-brainer for us in terms of the financial picture. The challenge is, we are providing a router for the families. So we have, we're using the 450B system as far as the subscriber module. And so we cable in, we put a little MikroTik router in the home, and that works well. MikroTik routers are fairly moderate in cost, but we do have, some of these families will move from time to time, and so sometimes in the process of moving, that router gets lost or thrown away or what have you, and so we do sometimes have to replace some gear. So we're looking at a model possibly going forward where we do not always provide, a MikroTik router in the home, but we're still going through that process. And then using the router that's built into the 450B to handle that type of connection for the NAT and DHCP and the firewall. So what else can I tell you? A lot of the connections for the families are in mobile home communities. And so pretty simple installs, really. We'll use an arm on the fascia of the trailer, or sometimes on a vent pipe on the roof, or sometimes we'll just take a couple bricks, put them on a mat, and use concrete screws to tie a arm right down to the bricks, and then run a cable. And so it's pretty quick install. A lot of the folks are Hispanic, so we've had to hire, both coordinators and installers that are bilingual, and that's made a huge difference in being able to coordinate and talk to folks. When we first started, we did not have bilingual folks to be able to coordinate that, and so we were dependent on the folks at the school. And when we were out on site, sometimes, all the kids are bilingual, right? So we were communicating through the kids to talk to the parents, and that wasn't always ideal. So we did go out and hire some bilingual folks to be able to make that a smoother communication path. But that
Jim, I have a question.
Yeah.
Sorry. So yeah, thanks for the overview. I know this goes back to 2016 when you started engaging with Boulder, and you mentioned that things kind of blew up, at the time of COVID, meaning a lot of activity. Could you kind of describe perhaps, I guess, what that means a little bit more, like over the last year and a half, what has been the changes, in terms of your engagement with Boulder related to this, these deployments? Have the numbers gone up significantly, or any kind of sense of how that impacted things?
Oh yeah, it did, absolutely. Well, before the pandemic, we were maybe getting 4 or 5 orders a month, and after the pandemic, it was up around 30 or 40. So it went up. Unfortunately, a lot of them were in areas where we had not expanded to yet. So there was some folks that we just couldn't help. But so we're still playing catch up. It looks like the schools are probably going to keep some form of online learning, distance learning, going forward, because it seems to be a pretty effective way for kids to catch up and to stay engaged, and even for parents to know what programs and curriculum their kids are going through, right? So we see that as an ongoing need going forward. So we're still playing catch up, and I really credit the creative thinking from Andrew and the folks at the IT department and the Boulder School Board for really putting all this together in a pretty quick, manner when the pandemic did hit, because when initially it was just kind of plodding along, and school boards typically move pretty slowly, so it's not like, things happen real quick in that world. So it takes time to get that set up. Since the pandemic, though, I would imagine other service providers should have a pretty, not exactly quick, but probably an expedient path to getting a similar arrangement set up with other school districts. So I think those opportunities are out there for people.
Mm-hmm. So just to clarify then, and this is how the deployment, started initially with Boulder, is you're using their schools for the access. You mentioned that you didn't have full coverage across to reach everyone. Was that because the schools weren't placed appropriately to be within the distance, and you had to find other means besides just running on the roofs of the schools to set up your footprint? Or just want to understand that a little bit more.
Yeah, a little of both. Well, number one, we just weren't on all the schools. We've built out, what is it now? I think around 20 of 40 some schools. So we're not quite halfway there in terms of the build out. And then we didn't have the hardware until just a few months ago. And so, that's why I'm talking about we're playing catch up. But in our network, so we started using not only those first 4 or 5 schools, but we had Livewire had existing distribution sites in both Lafayette and Boulder, where we started this program, that we used to augment, the service coverage. And so, we used those sites as well to be able to reach, because that's just anybody that's out there doing this, especially in these neighborhoods that have pretty good tree coverage. Ironically, you can't always connect to the closest access points. Sometimes it's just you have to find a different angle to work around a clump of trees or whatever's in the way to make it work. And so the schools are, you mentioned the schools and the placement, though. Geographically, schools, it's a pretty good model, because schools are set apart, every 2 to 3 miles generally in a city. I know in Boulder they are, and throughout most of the county they are. And that's to make it convenient for people to get their kids to and from school in the neighborhoods, I would imagine, but for this type of model, it works well, because that's about what you're looking for in terms of effective coverage, is that 2 to 3 mile range before you have another distribution point, right? So
right.
That works well for the model we're finding. And as our deployment increases and we get more access points up, we'll have more coverage, a lot more of a matrix to where we can shoot, and provide coverage from multiple access points, in several different areas to optimize the connectivity.
Jim, can you talk a little bit about the filtering, firewalling on the traffic itself? How do you tie that in to provide access to students, and from a network perspective, from a security perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've always ran and operated with layer 2 networks, so layer 2, from the subscriber module all the way to our core fiber network. And we've done that for businesses. We've done that for residential. We looked at LTE. We brought in another provider's LTE system, and it worked well. It was able to provide a connection where we couldn't otherwise. I mean, LTE has a great capability of being able to work with just minimal signal levels, but the throughput was not great, and we had a hard time providing adequate, for us, adequate service as far as our, what we expect to be able to provide in terms of a service level for the end user. We didn't feel like we had enough control over the end user. We had some blind spots with LTE. So we stuck with a layer 2 model. And so we have the MikroTik router in the home, and then that does the firewalling. It does network address translation, and it does DHCP at this time. And so we know with the 450Bs, they have the capability of doing all that in the subscriber module itself. And so, at some point we could go with even a lower cost, just a smaller, we've looked at the Cambium Wi-Fi units, and we want to bring some of those in and try those just as a small, real basic access point that would go in the home. So that would be much lower cost, hopefully, than what we have. And, so if it gets lost or what have you, it's not a big deal. But it would streamline that process for us in terms of deployment, I think. And then folks could use their own routers as well if they have their own router.
Yeah. And just to clarify for the audience, the 450B is the subscriber module that goes on the house that receives the wireless signal. So that essentially is a modem and would be covered by ECF, based on the current definition of the program that we understand.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the ECF will cover access points and it will cover the subscriber modules. We did timing modules with it, power supplies, and I think that's about it.
Okay. I didn't want to dominate all the questions here, Sakit. I don't know if you had any, or anybody from the audience. If you have some questions, please enter them into the Q&A window as well.
Jim, I just have one question. How did you go about building the relationship with Boulder School District? How did that happen?
It was curious because I had hired a sales and business development guy that actually came from Verizon. And I told him, we need places, we need to increase our coverage, let's just go out, let's talk to the housing authorities, let's talk to the schools, let's talk to anybody that's got a building that's over, 3 to 4 stories high, right? And so he was out, just knocking on doors up in Boulder, and he just happened to go into the IT department and started up a conversation, and it was just a timing thing. They had their connectivity ConnectMe fund program that they were trying to get off the ground, and just hit them at the right time, I guess, and it made sense. And Andrew had he's open-minded enough, to listen to what we were saying and kind of consider it, and we kicked it back and forth for, I don't know, several months. I don't know how long. It was a while before we were able to get, the pilot program agreed to and actually get things going. So it was a slow start. It was initially. I think now, though, we've had some inquiries from some other school districts, and I know other districts are looking at doing something similar. And so I know that, those opportunities are out there for folks.
Thank you, sir.
You bet.
Yeah, we have another question that came in. See if Jim, if you might know this, in areas where there is a documented proof where there aren't any providers, if we receive ECF funding to build out a network, does it have to be done through a PPP, or can it be done wholly owned by my company? I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Okay, so yeah, in unserved areas, I don't know really. We've not really looked at, trying to get funding. I know Colorado has some funding through the state Office of Engineering, or in Office of IT, OIT office, to promote, rural broadband in unserved areas. And there are funds, and I know in other states there are as well, funds that are specifically earmarked for unserved areas. None of the areas that we're in are unserved. That's not it. There are, Comcast is out there, CenturyLink is out there. It's not a question of these neighborhoods being unserved so much as it's just a simple fact that they cannot afford it. And it's incredible. As I started this program, I had no idea how many families are out there that just cannot afford something as simple as an monthly internet connection. We had families that, when we started, you coordinate with the family to call ahead and let them know the installation team is going to be there at a certain time and date. And we would call one day and we would get one person, and then call the next day or on the day of the installation, we get somebody else, right? And we couldn't figure out what was going on. We realized after some time that that family had one cell phone, right? And they're sharing this cell phone, passing it back and forth between, the parents, or a lot of times it's, an aunt or an uncle will live there. So it's like an extended family, grandmothers, grandfathers. And it was a real eye-opener for me because, after we got going, especially after the pandemic hit, wow, it's incredible how many families that are in that situation that just can't afford it. So it's not an underserved issue. It's an economic issue. And I haven't really spent a lot of time looking at trying to get out into unserved areas. We're mostly in the metro area and in these suburban areas along the Front Range and the Denver-Boulder corridor. So I'm probably not the right guy to talk to about trying to get funding for unserved areas.
Yeah, and just to maybe a follow to that, because Lou, who asked the question, was clarifying it was through the ECF that he was inquiring about this. I know that when the ECF, before the actual program was launched and made public, we had a chance to review the definition of the program and provide comments. And that was one of the key questions that was being asked by us and other vendors is network build-outs in areas that are not served. And it was not entirely clear in their final assessment or their final definition of the program. And let me actually just go back to a previous slide where we talked about that. Let's see, it was the previous one. Eligibility, my apologies here, but I believe so the last bullet here, in circumstances where there's no broadband service available, the fund may support construction of new networks. That's a pretty vague statement. It's not as obvious or direct as, hey, we'll provide money for the laptops or the hotspots. So I think the answer there is yes, it can potentially apply, but that will have to be analyzed and assessed. And I don't know exactly how difficult that would be or otherwise, but I think it's definitely part of the program that the consideration of the funding can be made for that. So that's what we're aware of, Lou. But we don't have kind of a crisp answer to that. So, okay. Any other comments, Sakid, or we'll move towards a wrap up here?
Yeah, I think we can go ahead and wrap it up, Bruce.
Okay. So just a quick summary, kind of a little bit about what we talked about, but you've heard the homework gap term being used here a few times. It defines that set of students, which is 17 million plus. I know when we entered COVID, hopefully it's a lot lower than that now, that do not have home internet access, and it's clear that this gap was absolutely highlighted when COVID hit, and the fact that many of these students, like Jim was talking about, didn't have access. So emergency funding acts, were put into place by the government, ECF, EBB, CARES, others as well that apply here. So hopefully you gained some insights today on how some of these fundings can be used. There definitely is still some discovery to be done in terms of exactly how some of these apply to some of the stuff we talked about, like new network build-outs. We have a resource page on our website where you can learn more and get some highlights of some of the things that we talked about, the 3 different solutions that Sakid presented. And from there as well, you can also click a link and enter your information, and we'll contact you and follow up to help you talk through more of this. We also have a link for the service providers as well. So I know there's some ISPs on the line, there's some customers on the line. So there's links for both of you if you want to contact us and learn more, or reach out directly to Zachary Loshivo. He's a person who is taking and can work with you directly and take your information, and then we'll follow up and open those discussions. I did also want to point out the handouts on the webinar. There is a copy of this presentation as well as a PDF file from the ECF itself. That's basically goes through the ECF and has all the ins and outs of it from USAC, and that's also available in the handout section. So with that, thank everyone for joining. And Riley, I believe this was recorded, and we'll have the recording available as well afterwards too, correct?
Yep, that's correct. We'll be sending it out to all attendees. So we'll be getting that.
Great, and I think we'll put it up on the website on that same page as well. So if there's others, folks that you have that want to listen to this, that should be available after the fact. So that's all from my side. Thank you very much for joining today.
Great, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Jim.
Bye.